The billionaire CEO laughed when his poor ex walked into his New Year's Eve party. Unaware she owned a multimillion-dollar company and raised his secret twins. "Maxwell," she greeted him, her voice steady despite the rapid pulse visible at her throat. "Impressive party." "Olivia," he kept his voice low, controlled. "This is a private event. How did you get in?" She raised an eyebrow, reaching into her small clutch to produce an embossed invitation. "The traditional way." "With one of these." Maxwell frowned, taking the card. "What do you want? Money? Is that why you've suddenly reappeared after 2 decades of silence?" Something flashed in her eyes, hurt, quickly masked by indignation. "Believe it or not, Maxwell, not everything revolves around your bank account. Business." He couldn't contain the derisive laugh that escaped him. "What business could possibly?" "I don't work for Winters Quantum Solutions, Maxwell. I am Winters Quantum Solutions, founder and CEO." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. But what Maxwell Reed didn't know, what would shatter his carefully constructed world within hours, was that the woman he'd once loved hadn't just built a multimillion-dollar empire without him. She'd also raised his children. Twins he never knew existed. Have you ever wondered what happens when the past you thought you understood returns with earth-shattering secrets? When the person you once dismissed as insignificant holds the keys to your future? If you've ever experienced that moment when everything you believed about your life suddenly unravels, give this video a like and join me for a story about power, secrets, and the reckoning that comes when truth finally emerges from shadow. Hi, my beautiful sisters. This story is for every woman who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or forced to choose between love and self-preservation. For those who've rebuilt their lives from scratch while carrying burdens no one else could see. Olivia Winters didn't just survive being pushed out of a powerful man's world. She thrived, creating her own empire and raising extraordinary children on her own terms. Her journey reminds us that our worth isn't determined by someone else's perception, that sometimes walking away is the strongest choice we can make, and that success is the sweetest when it's achieved against all odds. If you've ever had to start over with nothing but your determination and talent, this story is your vindication. The crystal chandeliers of the Archer Grand Hotel ballroom cast a golden glow over Manhattan's elite as they clinked champagne flutes and exchanged practiced pleasantries. New Year's Eve at Maxwell Reed's annual celebration was the event of the season. An exclusive gathering where business deals were sealed with handshakes worth millions and social hierarchies were reinforced with subtle cruelties. In the center of it all stood Maxwell himself, commanding attention without effort. At 42, the founder and CEO of Reed Innovations had the kind of presence that made rooms recalibrate when he entered them. His tailored Brioni tuxedo emphasized broad shoulders and a trim waist maintained by his personal trainer, while his dark hair, artfully threaded with silver at the temples, gave him an air of distinguished authority. Another record-breaking quarter, congratulated Walter Kingsley, CEO of a rival tech firm. The market can't get enough of your quantum encryption software. Maxwell's smile was practiced perfection. Innovation waits for no one, Walter. Perhaps if your R&D department understood that, you wouldn't be perpetually playing catch-up. The subtle barb delivered. Maxwell moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting compliments and dispensing calculated charm. This was his natural habitat, a world where power was currency and everyone knew exactly how much everyone else was worth. Until she walked in. Maxwell's glass paused halfway to his lips as Olivia Winters appeared in the grand entrance. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating. A ghost conjured by expensive champagne and the melancholy that sometimes ambushed him on milestone dates. But no, it was undeniably her. 20 years had passed since he'd last seen her, yet he would have recognized her anywhere. Her dark hair was shorter now, falling in soft waves to her shoulders rather than the waist-length curtain he'd once run his fingers through. Her face had matured from pretty to striking, cheekbones more pronounced, eyes more knowing. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but nowhere near the caliber of the designer gowns surrounding her. "Is that Olivia Winters?" murmured Diane Lowell, wife of his CFO, following Maxwell's stunned gaze. "I thought she disappeared years ago. Didn't she used to be your..." Assistant, Maxwell supplied smoothly, recovering his composure. A lifetime ago. More than an assistant. Much more. But that wasn't public knowledge, and Maxwell intended to keep it that way. How quaint that she's here, Diane continued, her smile sharpening with the prospect of fresh gossip. I wonder who invited her? I intend to find out, Maxwell replied, handing Diane his champagne flute and moving purposefully toward the entrance. Olivia spotted him coming. Impossible not to, really, as the crowd parted before him like a corporate sea before its Moses. Her chin lifted slightly, a gesture he remembered well from their past confrontations. Preparing for battle. Maxwell, she greeted him, her voice steady despite the rapid pulse visible at her throat. Impressive party. Olivia, he kept his voice low, controlled. This is a private event. How did you get in? She raised an eyebrow, reaching into her small clutch to produce an embossed invitation. The traditional way. With one of these. Maxwell frowned, taking the card. Authentic, down to the security hologram his team had implemented to prevent gatecrashers. Who gave you this? Does it matter? I'm here now. Her gaze swept the opulent ballroom. Success clearly agrees with you. What do you want? He demanded, cutting through the pleasantries. Money? Is that why you've suddenly reappeared after 2 decades of silence? Something flashed in her eyes. Hurt, quickly masked by indignation. Believe it or not, Maxwell, not everything revolves around your bank account. I'm here for business reasons that have nothing to do with you. Business? He couldn't contain the derisive laugh that escaped him. What business could possibly? Max? Called a voice from behind him. There you are. The Japanese investors are asking about the neural interface project. Maxwell turned to find his executive assistant, Blake, approaching with an apologetic expression. Tell them I'll be there momentarily, he instructed, turning back to Olivia only to discover she'd slipped away, disappearing into the crowd. For the next hour, Maxwell went through the motions of hosting. Charming investors, flattering politicians, maintaining the careful illusion that everyone in attendance mattered equally to him. But his attention remained divided, his gaze constantly searching for a glimpse of the woman who had once known him better than anyone. He found her on the terrace, leaning against the stone balustrade, Manhattan's glittering skyline spread before her like a carpet of stars. She'd added a shawl against the December chill, the delicate fabric fluttering in the breeze. You always did prefer fresh air to small talk, he said, closing the terrace door behind him. Olivia didn't turn. Some things don't change. And some things change beyond recognition. Maxwell moved to stand beside her, maintaining a careful distance. Like you showing up at my party after disappearing without a word 20 years ago. Now she did look at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Is that how you remember it? Me disappearing without a word. That's what happened. No, Maxwell. That's the story you told yourself. She shook her head slightly. I sent you letters for months. You never responded. Letters. Genuine confusion furrowed his brow. I never received any letters. Of course you didn't. Her laugh held no humor. Your father made sure of that. The mention of his father sent a chill through Maxwell that had nothing to do with the winter air. Harrison Reed had been a formidable force, a self-made billionaire who'd built Reed Industries from nothing and expected his only son to expand the empire. He'd also been ruthlessly protective of the Reed legacy, eliminating anything or anyone he perceived as a threat. My father had nothing to do with us, Maxwell said, though doubt had already taken root. Harrison had never approved of Olivia, had made it clear he considered her a gold digger targeting the Reed fortune. Your father had everything to do with why I left, Olivia countered. But that's ancient history now. Water under a very expensive bridge. She straightened, adjusting her shawl. Enjoy your party, Maxwell. I've seen what I came to see. As she moved to pass him, Maxwell caught her arm. Why are you really here, Olivia? After all this time. She looked pointedly at his hand until he released her. I told you. Business. What business? Winter's Quantum Solutions. She watched his face, clearly expecting recognition. When none came, she continued, "We're finalizing a partnership with Takashi Industries next week. Their CEO mentioned they'd be at your party, so I thought it prudent to attend." Maxwell stared at her, processing this information. Winter's Quantum Solutions was one of the most innovative companies in quantum computing, a direct competitor to Reed Innovation's newest division. He'd been trying to arrange a meeting with their reclusive founder for months, unsuccessfully. "You work for WQS?" he asked, recalibrating his understanding of her presence. Olivia's smile held a hint of satisfaction. "I don't work for Winter's Quantum Solutions, Maxwell. I am Winter's Quantum Solutions, founder and CEO." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Olivia, his former assistant, the woman he'd once believed would do anything to access his wealth, had built a company valued at over $300 million. Without his name, his connections, his resources. "That's impressive," he managed, genuine respect coloring his tone despite his shock. "Yes, it is." She held his gaze steadily. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I should find Mr. Takashi before midnight." This time, Maxwell didn't try to stop her as she walked away. Instead, he remained on the terrace, mind racing as he pieced together this new reality. Olivia hadn't just survived without him. She had thrived, built something remarkable, become someone remarkable, and he had missed it all. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were essential to your success, hit that like button. Sometimes the greatest motivation comes from those who believe we can't achieve without them. The party continued inside, counting down to midnight with increasing exuberance, but Maxwell remained isolated on the terrace, nursing a scotch and memories he'd thought long buried. Their whirlwind romance, the intensity of their connection, the devastating morning he'd woken to find her gone. Her side of the bed cold, her belongings removed from his penthouse as if she'd never existed. He'd been furious, then hurt, then coldly resolved to forget her. Had thrown himself into expanding Reed Innovations, acquiring companies, amassing wealth and influence that made him untouchable. Had convinced himself she'd been after his money all along, that her departure was a calculated move when she realized he wouldn't be manipulated. But if what she said about his father was true, Maxwell's phone vibrated with a text from Blake. "Japanese investors leaving. Should I arrange another meeting?" He pocketed the phone without responding, his attention caught by Olivia's figure visible through the ballroom windows. She was speaking with Takashi, her expression animated as she presumably discussed the technology that had made her company so valuable. Even from a distance, her passion was evident, the same intensity she'd once directed at him. As if sensing his gaze, she glanced toward the terrace. Their eyes met through the glass, a moment of connection that transcended the physical barrier between them. Then she deliberately turned away, refocusing on Takashi. The message was clear. She had moved on. Perhaps it was time he did too. Yet as Maxwell rejoined his guests, accepting congratulations on another successful year and deflecting questions about his temporary absence, he couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia's reappearance was more than coincidence, that there was more to her story than she'd revealed on the terrace. He found himself watching her throughout the remainder of the evening, noting how she navigated the room with quiet confidence, engaging key industry figures without the aggressive networking that characterized most business interactions at his events. She was selective in her conversations, purposeful in her movements, a woman with nothing to prove and specific objectives to accomplish. It was nearly 2 a.m. when the last guests departed, leaving only Maxwell's inner circle and hotel staff clearing the debris of celebration. Olivia had left an hour earlier, slipping out without saying goodbye, another echo of their past that twisted uncomfortably in his chest. "Successful evening, sir," Blake commented, handing Maxwell the night's portfolio. A leather-bound summary of connections made, deals advanced, and potential issues requiring follow-up. "Though you seemed distracted. An unexpected ghost from the past," Maxwell replied, scanning the document without really seeing it. "Blake, what do we know about Winter's Quantum Solutions? Innovative company, revolutionary approach to quantum encryption." Founded approximately 17 years ago. Very private operation. Their CEO rarely makes public appearances. Blake's efficiency was one of his most valuable qualities. They're rumored to be finalizing a partnership with Takashi that would effectively block our expansion into the Asian market. The CEO was here tonight, Maxwell said, closing the portfolio. Olivia Winters. Blake's expression remained professionally neutral, though his eyes registered surprise. The same Olivia Winters who used to work for you? The very same. Maxwell loosened his bow tie, suddenly feeling the weight of the evening. I want everything we have on her company. Full background, financial reports, client list. And, he hesitated, then continued, I want to know about her personal life, family, residence, relationships, everything. Of course, sir. Blake made a note in his tablet. May I ask why the sudden interest? Maxwell stared out at the New York skyline, the same view he'd shared with Olivia hours earlier. Let's call it due diligence on a potential acquisition. But as his car carried him back to his penthouse in the pre-dawn darkness, Maxwell knew his interest went beyond business strategy. Seeing Olivia again had awakened questions he'd buried years ago, questions that now demanded answers. Why had she really left? What had his father done? And most pressingly, why had she chosen this moment to re-enter his life? The answers, he suspected, would upend far more than his business plans for the coming year. Olivia Winters kicked off her heels the moment her hotel room door closed behind her, sighing with relief as her bare feet sank into plush carpet. Attending Maxwell's party had been necessary but exhausting, a calculated risk that had left her emotionally drained despite her outward composure. How was it? Asked a soft voice from the suite's sitting area. Olivia smiled at the young woman curled up on the sofa, textbooks spread around her. About as uncomfortable as expected, but productive. Takashi is on board. Amelia Winters looked up from her studies, her expression concerned. Did he recognize you? Immediately. Olivia moved to the minibar, pouring herself a modest whiskey. Though he seemed more shocked by my company than my presence. Typical? Amelia snorted, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. A gesture so reminiscent of Maxwell that Olivia's heart clenched. Did you tell him about us? No. Olivia sank into an armchair, cradling her drink. That wasn't part of tonight's agenda. At 19, Amelia possessed her father's analytical mind and her mother's determination. A formidable combination that had made her a prodigy in quantum physics and a freshman at MIT by 16. Her twin brother, Alexander, had inherited Maxwell's business instincts along with Olivia's empathy, making him the perfect chief operations officer for Winters Quantum Solutions despite his young age. Children Maxwell knew nothing about. Children who were the real reason she'd finally returned to New York after 2 decades of deliberate distance. He'll find out eventually, Amelia pointed out, closing her textbook, especially now that you've made direct contact. You know how thorough he is. I'm counting on it, Olivia admitted, but I needed to assess his reaction to me first, to see if there's any point in proceeding. The truth was more complicated than she'd shared with her daughter. Seeing Maxwell again, experiencing firsthand the power he still wielded, the empire he'd built, had reinforced her doubts about this plan. For 20 years, she'd protected the twins from his world, built a life and a company that operated on different principles than the cutthroat environment Maxwell thrived in. Was she risking all of that by revealing the truth now? Mom! Amelia's voice pulled her from her thoughts. You don't have to do this for us. Alex and I are fine with things as they are. Olivia studied her daughter's face, so like her own in structure, yet with Maxwell's penetrating gaze. This isn't just about you and your brother. It's about setting things right. About truths that have been buried too long. The decision to finally confront the past hadn't come easily. For years, Olivia had channeled her energy into raising the twins and building her company, creating a life that required no input from Maxwell Reed or his fortune. She'd succeeded beyond her wildest expectations, turning her innovative approach to quantum encryption into a company valued in the hundreds of millions. But success hadn't erased the fundamental wrong at the heart of their family story. The twins deserved to know their father, and Maxwell deserved to know his children existed. "What if he doesn't want anything to do with us?" Amelia asked, voicing the fear that had kept Olivia silent for so long. "What if he's angry you kept us from him?" "He probably will be angry," Olivia acknowledged. "But whatever happens between Maxwell and me, I believe he'll want to know you and Alex. Despite his many flaws, family has always mattered to him." What she didn't say was how vulnerable this made them all. Maxwell Reed wasn't accustomed to discovering aspects of his life beyond his control. His reaction to learning he had 19-year-old children could range from embracing them to legally attacking Olivia for keeping them from him. The uncertainty was terrifying. "Alex texted earlier," Amelia said, changing the subject. "The Singapore deal is finalized. We're officially expanding into the Asian market ahead of Reed Innovations." Olivia smiled despite her exhaustion. "Your brother has a gift for closing negotiations. He gets that from you." Amelia yawned, stretching like the cat she resembled in many ways, independent yet affectionate on her own terms. "I'm going to bed. Try not to overthink everything until morning. Okay?" "No promises," Olivia replied, accepting a quick kiss on the cheek before Amelia disappeared into her bedroom. Alone, Olivia moved to the suite's window, gazing out at the city she'd once called home. Somewhere out there, Maxwell was likely doing the same, perhaps already setting in motion the investigation that would lead him to the truth she'd protected for nearly 2 decades. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd left to protect her unborn children from Harrison Reed's manipulation, from becoming pawns in a power struggle between father and son. Now she was deliberately bringing them into Maxwell's orbit, risking everything she'd built to correct a wrong that had shaped all their lives. Her phone chimed with a text from Alexander. "Singapore contract signed. Takashi's legal team confirmed our meeting for Tuesday. How was the Dragon's Lair?" Olivia smiled at her son's description of Maxwell's party. "Survived with minimal burns," she typed back. "Your sister's already asleep. We'll talk tomorrow." Setting down her phone, Olivia finished her whiskey and prepared for bed, knowing sleep would likely prove elusive. Seeing Maxwell again had been more affecting than she'd anticipated. Despite the years and hurt between them, the connection that had once drawn them together remained, altered but not erased by time and circumstance. She'd been 24 when they met, a brilliant programmer hired as Maxwell's executive assistant when Reed Innovations was still a hungry upstart rather than the behemoth it had become. Their attraction had been immediate and mutual, though both had initially resisted for professional reasons. When they finally gave in, the relationship had consumed them with an intensity that still took her breath away to remember. For 18 months, they'd been inseparable, working together by day, loving by night, building both the company and a future they'd thought unshakable. Maxwell had even begun designing a ring, a detail she discovered only after leaving when his jeweler mistakenly called her to confirm specifications. Then Harrison Reed had summoned her to his office. The memory still chilled her. The elder Reed's Arctic smile as he'd laid out photographs of her estranged father accepting money, documentation of her mother's history of mental illness, medical records from her teenage hospitalization after a suicide attempt, all presented as evidence of her unsuitability as a Reed partner. "Maxwell has a destiny," Harrison had told her, his voice reasonable, almost kind. "A legacy to build. He can't do that with a wife whose bloodline is tainted with instability and weakness. You're a distraction he'll outgrow, but not before you've damaged his potential. Is that what you want for him?" When threats to her reputation hadn't moved her, Harrison had switched tactics, revealing his real leverage. "My son's company exists because I allow it to. His success continues at my pleasure. Defy me and I'll withdraw my support, my connections, my investment. I'll watch him fail, knowing you were the cause." Faced with destroying Maxwell's dream or leaving him to achieve it, Olivia had chosen the latter, only discovering her pregnancy 2 weeks after fleeing New York for her grandmother's home in Seattle. The twins had been born 7 months later, perfect and healthy despite arriving early. By then, Olivia had already begun developing the encryption algorithm that would eventually become Winter's Quantum Solutions Foundation. Necessity had driven her innovation, the need to support her children independently, to build something that could never be taken from them. Now, as she finally drifted towards sleep in the quiet hotel room, Olivia wondered if she was about to undo all her careful protection. Maxwell Reed was no longer the ambitious young entrepreneur she'd loved, but a powerful billionaire accustomed to controlling his environment and eliminating threats. How would he react to discovering he was a father? To learning his own father had orchestrated their separation? To realizing the woman he'd believed abandoned him had instead been protecting him? Tomorrow would begin the process of finding out. She'd instructed her legal team to deliver a formal introduction package to Reed Innovations, ostensibly a company profile ahead of potential collaboration, but containing subtle clues that would lead Maxwell's inevitable investigation toward the truth. A soft knock at her bedroom door roused her from near sleep. "Mom!" Amelia's voice was hesitant. "Can I come in?" "Of course, sweetheart." The door opened, revealing her daughter in MIT sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, looking younger than her 19 years. "I can't sleep," Amelia admitted, hovering in the doorway. "Keep thinking about tomorrow." Olivia lifted the covers in silent invitation, a gesture that had comforted the twins since childhood. Amelia slipped into bed beside her, curling close like she had as a little girl. "What if he hates us?" she whispered into the darkness. Olivia stroked her daughter's hair, choosing her words carefully. "Your father is many things. Driven, sometimes ruthless in business, protective of what he considers his. But he's not capable of hating his own children. That's not who he is." "How can you be so sure, after what his father did to you?" "Because I knew him," Olivia said simply. "The real Maxwell, not the public persona. And whatever happened between us, whatever he believes about why I left, the man I knew would move heaven and earth for his family." Amelia was quiet for a long moment. "Alex is worried this will change everything. That once Maxwell Reed knows about us, we'll lose our independence. That Winter's Quantum will become just another Reed acquisition." It was a fear Olivia herself had wrestled with. "That won't happen. The company is structured to prevent hostile takeovers, and both of you own significant shares. Maxwell can't simply absorb us, even if he wanted to. But he could make things difficult. Legally. Publicly. He could," Olivia acknowledged. "But I don't believe he will. Not once he understands everything that happened." As Amelia's breathing eventually deepened into sleep, Olivia remained awake, less certain than she'd pretended to be. The Maxwell she'd known would indeed have moved heaven and earth for his family. But the man she'd glimpsed tonight, hardened by success and what he perceived as her betrayal, that Maxwell was an unknown quantity. By morning, the wheels would be in motion. By the end of the week, Maxwell Reed would discover he had twin children on the cusp of adulthood. Children who had inherited his brilliance and drive but been raised with Olivia's values. Children who had helped build a company that now threatened his market dominance. The potential for disaster was enormous. Yet so was the possibility of healing, of finally correcting the fracture Harrison Reed had created in all their lives. Olivia closed her eyes, sending a silent prayer into the universe that the man she'd once loved still existed somewhere beneath the billionaire CEO's polished exterior. Because if he didn't, if Maxwell had truly become his father's son, she might be leading her children into a battle they couldn't win. If you've ever had to make an impossible choice to protect someone you love, comment below. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones no one else understands until years later. Maxwell Reed's morning routine never varied. 5-mile run regardless of weather, protein shake prepared by his personal chef, 30 minutes reviewing overnight developments in international markets, shower, and immaculate grooming overseen by a stylist who arrived precisely at 7:15. By 8:30, he was always in his office atop the Reed Tower, ready to command his empire with the precision and control that had made him a business legend. But this morning, his legendary focus was shattered by the dossier Blake had assembled on Olivia Winters and her company. "This can't be right," he muttered, scanning the information for the third time. Winters Quantum Solutions was founded 17 years ago in Seattle, But there's no record of Olivia's professional activities for the 3 years prior? That's correct, sir, Blake confirmed. There's a significant gap between her departure from Reed Innovations and the company's founding. Our investigators are still working to fill in that timeline. Maxwell frowned, troubled by the inconsistency. Olivia had been ambitious, driven. It was one of the qualities that had attracted him to her. The idea that she'd simply disappeared for 3 years before emerging as a tech founder didn't align with the woman he'd known. What about personal information? Residence? Family? Relationships? Blake hesitated, an unusual break in his professional demeanor. That's where things get interesting, sir. Ms. Winters maintains a primary residence in Seattle's Laurelhurst neighborhood, a substantial property purchased 15 years ago. She's never married, but she does have family. And, Maxwell prompted, impatience edging his tone. Twins, sir. A son and daughter, both 19 years old. Currently enrolled at MIT and Stanford, respectively, though the son appears to also serve as Chief Operations Officer for Winters Quantum. Maxwell stared at his assistant, the implications of this information slowly crystallizing. 19, he repeated, his voice unnaturally calm. Born when? March 17, 2006, Blake replied, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The date hit Maxwell like a physical blow. 9 months after Olivia had disappeared from his life. 9 months almost to the day. Their birth certificates, he managed, his throat suddenly dry. Father's name, listed as unknown, sir. Maxwell stood abruptly, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased his domain. 58 floors above a city he'd helped reshape through sheer force of will. Below, Manhattan continued its relentless rhythm, unaware that its most controlling resident had just discovered a fundamental truth about his life had been hidden from him for nearly 2 decades. Sir, Blake's voice penetrated his shock. There's more. The company's legal team delivered this package this morning. It's marked for your personal attention. Maxwell turned, accepting the sleek folder emblazoned with the Winters Quantum Solutions logo. Inside was standard corporate information, executive profiles, technology overviews, market position analysis, but paperclipped to the inside cover was a handwritten note in Olivia's distinctive script. Maxwell, after last night, you'll have questions. I'm prepared to answer them all. The Archer Grand, Suite 1812, 7 p.m. tonight. Come alone. Olivia. Beneath her signature was a postscript that made his blood run cold. They have your eyes. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Maxwell Reed felt control slipping through his fingers like sand. The carefully constructed narrative of his past, Olivia as the gold digger who'd abandoned him when manipulation failed, was disintegrating, replaced by a reality he couldn't yet fully comprehend. He had children, 19-year-old children who had grown up without him. Children whose existence had been kept from him by the only woman he'd ever truly loved. Cancel my appointments for the day, he instructed Blake, his decision immediate and absolute. And get me everything you can find on Alexander and Amelia Winters. Everything. All appointments, sir? Including the board meeting at 2. All of them. Maxwell's tone brooked no argument. This takes precedence. As Blake withdrew to execute his instructions, Maxwell returned to the dossier, studying the limited photographs of the twins with newfound intensity. They were undeniably striking, both with Olivia's dark hair and olive complexion, but with something in their features that resonated with his own reflection. His children. The thought was simultaneously foreign and strangely familiar, as if some part of him had always known, had been waiting for this revelation. Anger flared, at Olivia for keeping the secret, at himself for not somehow knowing, at his father for... What exactly? Olivia had implied Harrison was involved in her departure. But how deeply? What had the old man done? Harrison Reed had died 3 years ago, taking whatever secrets he'd held to his grave. The timing now seemed suspiciously convenient, Olivia reappearing only after the elder Reed could no longer interfere. For hours, Maxwell pored over every scrap of information his considerable resources could gather about the twins and Winters Quantum Solutions. The company's rise had been meteoric but carefully managed, innovative technology paired with ethical business practices that stood in stark contrast to Reed Innovations' more aggressive approach. Alexander Winters had joined the company officially at 17, though evidence suggested he'd been involved in operations much earlier. Despite his youth, he'd negotiated partnerships with established tech giants that had expanded WQS's reach exponentially. The industry press described him as brilliantly strategic with an unusual emphasis on human impact, a combination of Maxwell's business acumen and what could only be Olivia's humanizing influence. Amelia Winters was more academic, a published researcher in quantum physics at an age when most were still undergraduates. Her theoretical work underpinned the company's technological advances, creating encryption methods that even Reed Innovations' best minds hadn't yet matched. Like her brother, she balanced intellectual brilliance with social consciousness, dedicating significant time to increasing female representation in STEM fields. They were, Maxwell had to admit, extraordinary. The kind of children any father would be proud to claim. Children who had been raised entirely without his knowledge or input, who had formed their identities, achieved their successes, and navigated their challenges without him. The realization was a peculiar kind of grief, mourning for experiences he should have shared but never knew to miss. First steps, school achievements, adolescent struggles, all the moments that constructed a life, multiplied by 2, erased from his history as if they'd never existed. By the time 7 o'clock approached, Maxwell's initial shock had crystallized into a complex amalgam of emotions. Anger at the deception, pride in what his children had accomplished, and beneath it all, a profound sense of loss for the years that could never be reclaimed. The Archer Grand's penthouse level housed its most exclusive suites, accessible only by private elevator with key card authorization. As CEO of the company that owned the hotel chain, Maxwell bypassed these security measures, his authority unquestioned by staff who scrambled to accommodate his unexpected appearance. Standing before Suite 1812, he hesitated for the first time that day. Beyond this door waited answers to questions he hadn't known to ask, and possibly, the children he hadn't known existed. The magnitude of the moment struck him with unusual clarity. Whatever happened next would irrevocably alter the carefully controlled life he'd built. Maxwell Reed, who made billion-dollar decisions without blinking, found his hand uncharacteristically unsteady as he knocked on the door that separated him from his past and, potentially, his future. The door opened, revealing not Olivia but a young man whose features hit Maxwell with the force of recognition. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. The same jawline, the same penetrating gaze, though softened by elements that were purely Olivia. "Mr. Reed," the young man said, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. "I'm Alexander Winters, your son." The words hung in the air between them, simple yet profound in their implication. Maxwell found himself momentarily speechless, a condition he hadn't experienced in boardrooms, before Congress, or even when facing down his most formidable business rivals. "May I come in?" he finally managed, his voice rougher than intended. Alexander stepped aside, revealing the suite's elegant living area where Olivia stood near the window, her posture straight but her hands clasped tightly in front of her, a gesture Maxwell remembered from whenever she was nervous but determined not to show it. Beside her stood a young woman who could only be Amelia, her resemblance to Olivia even more pronounced than Alexander's, though her eyes, Maxwell's eyes, studied him with analytical intensity. "Maxwell," Olivia greeted him, her voice carefully controlled. "Thank you for coming." "Did you imagine I wouldn't?" he replied, unable to keep the edge from his tone as he closed the door behind him. "After learning I have 19-year-old children I never knew existed? We expected anger," Alexander interjected, moving to stand protectively near his mother and sister. "It's understandable. But before you direct it all at our mother, you should know the full story." Maxwell's gaze shifted between the three of them. This family unit that had formed and solidified without him, bound by shared history and experiences he could never recover. "I'm listening," he said finally, remaining standing rather than accepting the implicit invitation to sit. Some conversations demanded the full armor of formality. Olivia nodded, seeming to understand his need for distance. Perhaps we should start at the beginning, with your father. For the next hour, Maxwell listened as Olivia detailed Harrison Reed's interference. The threats, the blackmail, the ultimatum that had forced her to choose between Maxwell's dream and their relationship. She spoke without dramatic embellishment, laying out the facts with the same precision she'd once applied to corporate reports. I discovered I was pregnant 2 weeks after leaving New York, she continued, her voice softening as she glanced at the twins. By then, your father had made it clear any attempt to contact you would result in the destruction of everything you'd worked for. I couldn't be responsible for that. So you decided to be responsible for keeping my children from me instead, Maxwell stated, the anger he'd been containing finally breaking through. For 19 years, Olivia. Their entire lives. I wrote to you, she countered, a flash of her own anger surfacing. Dozens of letters during that first year. When you never responded, I assumed you'd made your choice. I never received any letters. The realization of his father's thoroughness hit Maxwell anew. Harrison must have intercepted them. We figured as much eventually, Alexander said, his tone matter-of-fact. Grandfather Reed was nothing if not comprehensive in his interference. The casual reference to Harrison as grandfather sent an unexpected pang through Maxwell. These children had grown up knowing who their grandfather was, knowing who their father was, yet had been kept from any relationship with either. When did you learn about me? He asked the twins directly, needing to understand their perspective. We always knew, Amelia answered, speaking for the first time. Her voice was softer than her brother's, but no less confident. Mom never hid your identity from us. We had pictures, stories. We knew exactly who our father was. And who did she tell you I was? Maxwell couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. A villain who abandoned her? A corporate tyrant too focused on wealth to care about family? Actually, Alexander replied with surprising gentleness. She told us you were brilliant, driven, that you could see solutions where others saw only problems, that your laugh was rare but worth waiting for. She said we got our analytical minds from you, Amelia added, that you could break down complex systems and rebuild them better than anyone she'd ever known. Maxwell looked at Olivia, genuinely surprised. You said that? After believing I'd ignored your letters, your pregnancy. I never wanted them to grow up resenting half of themselves, Olivia said simply. Whatever happened between us, you were still their father. They deserved to know the good in you. The admission disarmed him more effectively than recriminations would have. He found himself sinking into the nearest chair, the weight of the day's revelations finally overwhelming his carefully maintained composure. Why now? He asked after a moment. After all these years, why reveal yourselves now? The twins exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them before Alexander answered. Several reasons. Grandfather Reed's death removed the original threat. Our age means we can make our own decisions about relationship with you. And professionally, he hesitated. Professionally, our companies are on a collision course, Amelia finished for him. Winter's Quantum and Reed Innovations are competing for the same contracts, the same markets. It seemed better to address the personal connection before it became a public complication. Maxwell nodded slowly, recognizing the strategic thinking that mirrored his own. So this is a business decision? No, Olivia interjected firmly. The timing is influenced by business considerations, but the decision itself is personal. These are your children, Maxwell. They deserve the chance to know their father, if that's something you want. If that's something I want, he repeated, a hollow laugh escaping him. You present me with adult children I never knew existed and ask if I want to know them? As if this were a simple choice rather than a complete upheaval of everything I understood about my life. We don't expect an immediate relationship, Alexander said, his tone diplomatic. We understand this is a shock. A shock. Maxwell shook his head, the understatement almost comical. I've built my life on control, on knowing all variables, on anticipating every possibility. Yet I never anticipated this. that the woman I once planned to marry had been raising my children across the country while I built an empire I thought would be my only legacy. A heavy silence followed his words, the four of them suspended in a moment of shared recognition. Nothing would be the same after tonight. Whatever paths they chose moving forward, the revelation itself had permanently altered their separate worlds. "I have a proposal," Amelia said finally, her analytical mind apparently having processed the situation while the others grappled with its emotional weight. "A structured approach to getting acquainted. Professional first, then personal. We start with a limited business collaboration between our companies. Something that allows us to interact in a defined context with clear boundaries." Maxwell found himself studying his daughter with newfound appreciation. The suggestion was elegant in its practicality, acknowledging the reality of their corporate competition while creating space for the more complex personal relationship to develop at its own pace. "That's actually quite sensible," he admitted. "She gets that from both of us," Olivia said softly. "The ability to find the practical path through emotional complexity." For the first time since entering the suite, Maxwell allowed himself to really look at Olivia, not through the lens of betrayal or lost years, but as she was now. A successful entrepreneur, a mother who had raised remarkable children, a woman who had built something significant from the ashes of what they'd once shared. "You did well with them," he acknowledged, the words difficult but necessary. "Better than I might have, given my father's influence at the time." "We did well despite your absence," Alexander corrected, protective of his mother even in this moment of potential reconciliation. "Not because of it." Maxwell nodded, accepting the rebuke as deserved. "Fair enough. Perhaps we should continue this conversation over dinner," Olivia suggested, clearly sensing the need for a shift in energy. "There's a private dining room reserved downstairs. Neutral territory might help us all process." The suggestion was reasonable, though Maxwell suspected no territory would feel truly neutral in this unprecedented situation. Still, the structure of a meal would provide welcome familiarity amid so much upheaval. "Dinner would be acceptable," he agreed, rising from his chair with renewed composure. "Though I should warn you, I have approximately 19 years of questions. And we have 19 years of answers," Amelia replied with a small smile that transformed her serious face, revealing a dimple identical to his own. "Though I suspect neither will fit into a single meal." As they prepared to leave the suite, Maxwell found himself studying the twins with a mixture of wonder and regret, seeing in them echoes of himself and Olivia, yet recognizing they were entirely their own people, shaped by experiences he would never fully understand. They were strangers who shared his blood, his features, perhaps even elements of his character. The path to knowing them, to earning the right to be called their father rather than merely their biological parent, would be complex and uncertain. Yet as Alexander held the door with a gesture unconsciously similar to Maxwell's own habitual courtesy, as Amelia gathered her notes with the same methodical precision he applied to his own work, he felt something unexpected stir beneath the anger and loss. Possibility. These extraordinary young people were his children. Whatever had been lost could never be recovered, but what might yet be built remained entirely unwritten. For Maxwell Reed, who had spent a lifetime controlling outcomes and eliminating variables, this unscripted future represented both his greatest challenge and, perhaps, his most meaningful opportunity. If you believe that it's never too late for second chances, even after decades of separation, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that remind us how life's most painful chapters can sometimes lead to unexpected new beginnings. 20 years earlier, Maxwell Reed had been a different man, hungry, ambitious, but not yet hardened by the relentless pursuit of power and success. At 22, fresh from his MBA and armed with revolutionary ideas about quantum computing security, he'd launched Reed Innovations with seed money reluctantly provided by his father, determined to build something that would eclipse Harrison Reed's old money empire. The company's early days had been chaotic, exhilarating, fueled by Maxwell's vision and the small team of brilliant minds he'd assembled in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. They worked punishing hours, subsisted on takeout and caffeine, and believed with religious fervor that they were creating technology that would change the world. 6 months in, When his overworked assistant quit without notice, Maxwell had interviewed replacements himself, impatient with HR's inability to find someone who could match his pace and anticipate his needs. "Your resume is impressive," he told the final candidate of the day, barely glancing up from her credentials. "But everyone who's sat in that chair today has had impressive resumes. Why should I hire you over them?" "Because I understand your encryption algorithm better than your current development team," Olivia Winters replied calmly. "And I've identified 3 vulnerabilities they've missed." That got his attention. Maxwell looked up, really seeing her for the first time. Dark eyes that met his gaze without flinching, an intelligence that radiated from her more powerfully than her understated beauty. "Prove it," he challenged, sliding a notepad across his desk. Without hesitation, she diagrammed the weaknesses in his system, explaining each with precision and clarity. When she finished, Maxwell stared at her notes, then at her, reassessing everything about the woman he'd initially categorized as just another assistant candidate. "You should be applying for our development team, not an administrative position," he said finally. "I applied to both. Your HR department decided my computer science degree and coding experience qualified me to answer your phones and manage your calendar." Her tone was matter-of-fact, without bitterness. "I decided to take whichever interview was offered, because I wanted to work for this company. I believe in what you're building." Maxwell made his decision instantly. "You're hired. As my executive assistant, yes, but with direct input to the development team. I want those vulnerabilities addressed immediately." "When do I start?" "Right now." He gestured to the desk outside his office. "Your predecessor left mid-email. Consider it your first test. Figure out what she was working on and finish it." Olivia had risen to that challenge and everyone that followed. Within weeks, she'd become indispensable, anticipating Maxwell's needs before he articulated them, streamlining operations, and gradually contributing more substantively to the company's technical development. She worked as tirelessly as Maxwell himself, often staying late to discuss project details or strategic decisions. Their professional relationship was intense but strictly bounded, until the night they found themselves alone in the office at 2 a.m., celebrating a major contract win with the last of the champagne the team had opened earlier. "To Reed Innovations," Olivia toasted, her smile looser than usual after 2 glasses. "Soon to be the most important security firm in tech." "To the team that's making it happen," Maxwell countered, studying her over the rim of his glass. "Especially the assistant who's become far more than that." Something shifted in the air between them, the professional boundaries suddenly thin and permeable. Maxwell set down his glass, acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the subtle scent of her perfume, of how often he'd found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. "We shouldn't," Olivia said softly, reading his thoughts with the same uncanny perception she applied to everything. "Probably not," he agreed, not moving away. "It would complicate everything." "Undoubtedly. I don't want special treatment. I'd never offer it." They stood in silence, the decision hanging between them, until Olivia smiled. A different smile than he'd seen before, intimate and challenging. "Then again," she said, "we've never been conventional about anything else. Why start now?" Their first kiss was tentative, exploratory, but quickly deepened into something that made it clear they'd both been restraining this attraction for months. When they finally broke apart, Maxwell knew with absolute certainty that everything had changed, and that he didn't regret it for a moment. What followed was the most intense period of Maxwell's life. By day, they maintained professional boundaries, Olivia still performing her role as executive assistant with impeccable efficiency. By night, they explored a connection that went far beyond physical attraction. A meeting of minds that made their romantic relationship as intellectually stimulating as it was passionate. For the first time, Maxwell found himself with a true partner, someone who challenged his thinking, refined his vision, and understood both his ambition and the insecurities that drove it. With Olivia, he could be vulnerable in ways he'd never allowed himself before, revealing the complicated relationship with his father that had shaped so much of his drive to succeed. "He's never believed in me," Maxwell confessed one night as they lay tangled in his bed, the city lights creating patterns across the ceiling. Everything I've accomplished he dismisses as luck or the natural advantage of the Reed name. Nothing I build will ever be enough. Olivia propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light. Then stop trying to prove yourself to him. Build what you want to build the way you want to build it. Your father's approval isn't the measure of your worth, Max. It was the first time anyone had suggested that Harrison Reed's opinion might be irrelevant. A perspective so foreign yet so liberating that it shifted something fundamental in Maxwell's approach to both his company and his life. As Reed Innovations grew, so did their relationship. They moved in together 6 months after that first kiss, creating a home that balanced Maxwell's preference for minimalist luxury with Olivia's warmer aesthetic. They worked hard but made time for each other: weekend getaways, cooking experiments in their rarely used kitchen, long conversations about everything from quantum physics to philosophy. Maxwell began thinking about marriage, about a future that included not just professional success but personal fulfillment. He'd never been a man who needed others, but he'd come to need Olivia, her insight, her balance, her ability to see him clearly and love him anyway. The only shadow on their happiness was Harrison Reed's increasingly obvious disapproval. The elder Reed had initially dismissed Olivia as a temporary distraction, but as the relationship deepened, his attitude had hardened into active hostility. "She's using you," Harrison told his son during a rare dinner together. "A woman from her background, with her family history. She sees you as a ticket to security. The Reed name, the Reed fortune. Don't be naive, Maxwell. You don't know her," Maxwell had replied, keeping his temper in check with effort. "And you certainly don't know us. Olivia has never asked me for anything. Not money, not status, nothing. She works as hard as I do for everything we're building." Harrison's smile had been cold, knowing. "They never ask directly, son. That's not how it works. But mark my words, she'll take everything she can get. It's in her blood." Maxwell had dismissed his father's warnings as the prejudice of old money against new talent. Harrison had always been an elitist, judging people by their pedigree rather than their abilities. It was one of many ways father and son fundamentally disagreed. What Maxwell didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Harrison Reed had already begun his campaign to remove Olivia from his son's life, gathering information, applying pressure, preparing for the moment when he would ensure the Reed legacy continued according to his vision, not Maxwell's. That moment came sooner than anyone expected. On a rainy Tuesday, when Olivia received a message requesting her presence at Harrison Reed's office. She went without telling Maxwell, assuming it related to some administrative matter involving the company's investors. She returned to their apartment that night with her face pale, her decision already made, though it broke her heart. By morning, she was gone, leaving behind only a brief note. "I'm sorry. This is for the best. Please don't try to find me." Maxwell had been devastated, then furious, then coldly determined to erase every trace of her from his life and his company. He threw himself into work with renewed intensity, channeling his pain into ambition, his betrayal into ruthless business strategy. If Olivia had left him without explanation, without fighting for what they'd built together, then clearly what they'd shared had meant less to her than he'd believed. The only logical conclusion was that his father had been right all along. She'd been using him, and when something better came along, she'd moved on without a backward glance. This narrative hardened into certainty as months passed with no word from her. Maxwell systematically dismantled the life they'd shared, selling their apartment, removing her contributions from company materials, restructuring teams she'd helped build. He dated occasionally but kept relationships superficial and brief. No one would ever get close enough to wound him again. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Olivia Winters was creating a different life. One centered around the twins growing inside her and the technological innovation that necessity had accelerated. Living in her grandmother's modest Seattle home, she'd used her savings to set up a small workspace where she continued developing the encryption algorithm she'd begun at Reed Innovations. The twins' birth had been both joyous and terrifying. Joyous in the miracle of these perfect beings who connected her forever to the man she still loved despite everything. Terrifying in the awesome responsibility of raising them alone, of protecting them from Harrison Reed's toxic influence, of building a future secure enough that they would never be vulnerable to manipulation. "They're beautiful, Olivia," her grandmother had whispered, cradling newborn Amelia while Alexander slept in his mother's arms. "They deserve to know their father. They will," Olivia had promised, "when they're old enough to understand why I left. When Harrison can no longer threaten their future or Maxwell's company. And if that day never comes, then I'll make sure they know who their father is, the good parts, the brilliant parts. They'll know they come from greatness, even if they can never claim the connection publicly." True to her word, as the twins grew, Olivia shared carefully selected stories about Maxwell. His vision, his determination, his rare but transformative laugh. She showed them photographs, explained how their analytical abilities mirrored his, celebrated the traits they'd inherited from both parents. What she never shared were the painful details of Harrison's ultimatum or her own heartbreak at leaving the life she'd planned with Maxwell. The early years were lean but purposeful. Olivia worked as a freelance programmer while developing her quantum encryption breakthrough, often coding late into the night after the twins were asleep. When Alexander and Amelia were 3, she secured her first patent, using the licensing fees to move them to a small house with a yard. By the time they were 5, Winter's Quantum Solutions existed as more than just an idea, a fledgling company with 2 employees and 1 revolutionary product. As the twins entered school, demonstrating the exceptional intelligence they'd inherited from both parents, WQS began to grow. Olivia was selective about investors, choosing partners who valued ethical applications of technology over maximum profit, who understood her vision of security that served people rather than exploiting them. She structured the company carefully, maintaining controlling interest while creating a corporate culture antithetical to the cutthroat environment Harrison Reed had cultivated. The twins grew up in this environment, watching their mother build something meaningful, learning the value of innovation balanced with responsibility. They were precocious but grounded, their extraordinary intelligence nurtured without the pressure to perform that had characterized Maxwell's childhood under Harrison's critical eye. By the time Alexander and Amelia were teenagers, Winter's Quantum Solutions had become a significant player in the security sector, known for both technological excellence and ethical business practices. Olivia had achieved what once seemed impossible: financial security, professional respect, and a family untouched by Harrison Reed's toxic influence. Yet as the twins approached adulthood, questions about their father became more pointed, their curiosity about their paternal heritage more difficult to satisfy with carefully edited stories. "Why can't we just meet him?" 16-year-old Alexander had asked after discovering yet another article about Maxwell Reed's business triumphs. "Grandfather Reed died last year. The threat is gone." "It's complicated, Alex," Olivia had replied, the same answer she'd given for years. "Because you're afraid he'll be angry?" Amelia had pressed. "Or because you're afraid he won't be? That he won't care about us at all?" The question had struck too close to Olivia's deepest fear. Not that Maxwell would reject the twins, but that he would embrace them while continuing to believe the worst about her. That he would use his considerable resources to turn them against her, to punish her for the years of separation by taking away the most precious part of her life. "Your father deserves to know about you," she'd acknowledged finally. "And you deserve to know him. But the timing has to be right. When you're both established in your own right, when meeting him won't derail the futures you're building." That time had come sooner than she'd anticipated. Alexander's natural business acumen had made him an invaluable part of WQS by 17, his strategic vision complementing Olivia's technical expertise. Amelia's theoretical work in quantum physics had earned her early admission to MIT and recognition in the field that had nothing to do with her connection to either parent. They were ready. The question was whether Maxwell was, whether the man Olivia had glimpsed at the New Year's Eve party, powerful but isolated, successful but guarded, retained enough of the person she'd loved to embrace not just his children but the truth about why they'd been kept from him. Now, as the 4 of them settled into the private dining room at the Archer Grand, that question hung in the air, unspoken but omnipresent. The first awkward moments passed as they ordered drinks and studied menus, the mundane ritual of a meal providing structure for an encounter that defied conventional social scripts. "I'd like to understand more about Winter's Quantum," Maxwell said finally, directing his question to Alexander. The press coverage suggests your approach to encryption is fundamentally different from most competitors. It was a safe opening, professional, controlled, focusing on the area where his son had already proven himself. Alexander recognized the strategy and responded in kind, explaining WQS's core technology with the confidence of someone who understood both its technical complexity and market positioning. Our foundational algorithm actually began at Reed Innovations, he acknowledged, glancing at his mother. Mom continued developing it after she left, taking it in a direction that prioritized user privacy over backdoor access. The philosophical difference between our companies, Maxwell noted, his expression thoughtful rather than confrontational. Reed provides security with guaranteed access points for authorized entities. Winters builds walls no one can breach, including governments. We believe privacy is a fundamental right, Amelia interjected, her passion for the principle evident. That security shouldn't come with built-in vulnerabilities, regardless of who holds the keys. A perspective that's made you both celebrated and controversial, Maxwell observed, particularly with intelligence agencies. A controversy we're familiar with from both sides, Olivia said quietly. You faced similar criticism for providing those backdoors, just from different quarters. Maxwell acknowledged this with a slight nod. The eternal tension between security and privacy. We've taken different paths to addressing the same fundamental problem, which makes the potential for collaboration interesting, Alexander suggested, returning to Amelia's earlier proposal. Each approach has strengths the other lacks. The conversation continued in this vein through the first course, professional, substantive, allowing all four participants to engage on familiar ground while navigating the emotional undercurrents. Maxwell asked insightful questions about WQS's technology and business model. The twins demonstrated their comprehensive understanding of both their company and the broader industry. Olivia occasionally clarified technical points but largely allowed her children to lead the discussion. It was during the main course that Maxwell shifted focus, his questions becoming more personal. You mentioned MIT, he said to Amelia. What drew you to theoretical physics rather than applied technology? The question opened a door to more personal territory, which Amelia walked through with cautious enthusiasm, explaining her fascination with the mathematical foundations underlying quantum systems. As she spoke, her natural animation emerged, her hands gesturing expressively in a manner strikingly similar to Maxwell's own when discussing concepts that excited him. Mom says I get that from you, she noted, catching herself mid-gesture. The hand-talking when I'm explaining something. Your mother is correct, Maxwell replied, a hint of warmth breaking through his composed exterior. My board chairman once suggested I sit on my hands during presentations to prevent knocking over water glasses. Alex does it too, Amelia continued, though he's better at controlling it in business settings. Years of practice, Alexander admitted. And Mom filming me during mock presentations to show me how distracting it could be. You filmed them? Maxwell asked Olivia, something unreadable flickering across his face. Everything, she confirmed softly. First steps, school plays, science fair projects. I have archives. The implication hung between them, evidence of all the moments Maxwell had missed, preserved but experienced without him. A silence fell, heavy with the weight of lost years. I'd like to see them, Maxwell said finally, his voice carefully neutral. If that would be acceptable. Of course, Olivia agreed. They're your children. Their history belongs to you too. The meal continued, conversation flowing more naturally as the initial tension gradually eased. The twins shared stories from their childhood, science experiments gone wrong, Alexander's brief but disastrous attempt at team sports, Amelia's phase of taking apart every electronic device in the house to understand its components. Olivia added context and occasionally corrected exaggerated details, while Maxwell listened with undisguised fascination, piecing together the lives that had developed parallel to his own. As dessert arrived, Alexander addressed the elephant in the room. So where do we go from here? Professionally and otherwise? Maxwell considered the question, his expression thoughtful. Professionally, I believe Amelia's suggestion has merit. A limited collaboration between our companies would be mutually beneficial and provide a structured context for ongoing interaction. And personally? Amelia pressed gently. Personally, Maxwell began, then paused, choosing his words with care. Personally, I find myself in the unprecedented position of wanting to know my adult children without having experienced their childhood. Of feeling simultaneous pride in who you've become and grief for not having witnessed how you got here. He looked directly at the twins, his customary mask of control slipping to reveal genuine emotion. I don't know how to be your father, but I would like the opportunity to learn, if you're willing to teach me. The simple honesty of the statement, so unlike the calculated responses that characterized Maxwell Reed's public persona, created a moment of authentic connection. Alexander and Amelia exchanged glances, their twin bond communication requiring no words, before Alexander responded. We'd like that, he said simply. We've known about you our whole lives. Now we'd like to actually know you. As the meal concluded and they prepared to part ways, Maxwell addressed Olivia directly for the first time since their initial confrontation. We have more to discuss, you and I, about the past, about my father's actions, about the choices you made. Yes, she agreed, meeting his gaze steadily. We do. Not tonight, he continued. There's been enough revelation for one day, but soon. Whenever you're ready, Olivia replied. I've waited 20 years. I can wait a little longer for you to process everything. Outside the hotel, as they prepared to go their separate ways, an awkward moment arose. How to conclude this unprecedented encounter? Handshakes seemed too formal, embraces too presumptuous. It was Amelia who broke the impasse, stepping forward to offer Maxwell a business card. My direct number, she explained, in case you have questions, or just want to talk. Maxwell accepted the card, then surprised everyone by reaching into his wallet and extracting not his standard corporate card but a plain white one with only a phone number handwritten on it. My private line. Not even my assistant has this number. He handed one to each of the twins, then, after a moment's hesitation, to Olivia as well. For emergencies, he explained. Or not. It was a small gesture but significant. An opening, an invitation, an acknowledgement that whatever came next would exist outside the formal structures of business and scheduled meetings. A first tentative step toward something that resembled family. As Maxwell's car pulled away, Olivia stood between her children, watching the taillights disappear into Manhattan's endless flow of traffic. Well, Alexander said finally, that went better than expected. He didn't yell, threaten legal action, or attempt a hostile takeover of WQS. Give him time, Amelia replied, only half joking. It's been less than 24 hours since he learned we exist. Olivia remained silent, her thoughts on the man who had just left them. So familiar in some ways, so changed in others. The Maxwell she'd loved was still visible beneath the polished exterior of the billionaire CEO. In moments of unguarded expression, in gestures and mannerisms the years hadn't altered. But there were new layers too, hardened by success and solitude, shaped by the very absence she'd been responsible for creating. Do you think he'll ever forgive you? Amelia asked quietly, reading her mother's thoughts with characteristic perception. I don't know, Olivia admitted. And perhaps that's not what matters most. What matters is that you both have the chance to know your father. The rest will unfold as it will. As they returned to their suite, Olivia found herself holding the card Maxwell had given her, the 7 digits in his precise handwriting representing a connection she believed permanently severed. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. And after 20 years of closure, possibility felt remarkably like hope. If you believe that some bonds can transcend even decades of separation, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late for healing to begin. The following week unfolded with cautious communication between the newly connected family members. Alexander and Maxwell exchanged several business-focused emails, laying groundwork for the proposed collaboration between their companies. Amelia sent her father a recently published paper on quantum entanglement applications, receiving in return thoughtful questions that demonstrated He'd not only read it but understood its implications at a level few non-specialists could. Olivia maintained her distance, allowing Maxwell space to build relationships with the twins without her complicated presence as a factor. She focused instead on preparing for the Takashi Industries partnership announcement, immersing herself in work that had always provided structure during emotional upheaval. 10 days after their dinner at the Archer Grand, Olivia's phone chimed with a text from the number Maxwell had given her. "We should talk. Alone. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. My penthouse or location of your choice." She stared at the message, heart racing despite her best efforts at composure. This was the conversation she'd both anticipated and dreaded for 20 years, the full reckoning with their shared past and separate choices. "Your choice," he'd written, offering her control of the environment. A small but significant acknowledgement of the power imbalance between them. "Neutral ground," she texted back. "There's a small restaurant in Brooklyn. Salvatore's on Montague Street. Private back room." His response came immediately. "I'll arrange it." Olivia spent the next day in a state of controlled anxiety, reviewing mental notes of everything she needed to explain, anticipating his questions, preparing for his anger. By the time she arrived at Salvatore's, a family-owned Italian restaurant she discovered during her early days at Reed Innovations, her nerves were stretched taut despite her outward calm. The owner, now gray-haired but still instantly recognizable, greeted her with surprised delight. "Ms. Winters, it has been many years. Mr. Reed said you would be joining him. Like old times, yes." Not quite like old times, Olivia thought, but managed to smile. "It's good to see you again, Salvatore. How's your family? Growing always. 3 grandchildren now." He led her through the main dining room to a familiar door at the back. "Mr. Reed is waiting. I have brought the wine already, the Barolo you both preferred." The small private dining room looked exactly as she remembered. Warm wood paneling, soft lighting from wall sconces, a single table that could accommodate 6 but was typically set for 2. Maxwell stood as she entered, his expression guarded but not hostile. "You remembered this place," he said, a statement rather than a question. "Of course." Olivia took the seat across from him, noting that he'd chosen not to sit at the head of the table, another small adjustment to their dynamic. "We came here to celebrate your first major contract, and again when we moved in together. And the night before you disappeared," Maxwell added, pouring wine into her glass with the same precise movement she remembered. "Though I didn't realize that would be our last dinner here." Olivia accepted the glass, taking a small sip to steady herself. "I didn't either, until the next morning when your father summoned me to his office." Maxwell's jaw tightened at the mention of Harrison, but he didn't interrupt as Olivia finally told him the complete story. The photographs of her estranged father accepting money, the medical records documenting her mother's mental illness and her own teenage hospitalization after her parents' deaths, the carefully constructed case Harrison had built to prove her unsuitability as a Reed partner. "He said he'd been investigating me since our relationship became serious," she continued, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "That he'd found weaknesses in my background that would destroy both my reputation and yours if made public. But that was just the opening salvo." "What was the real threat?" Maxwell asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Your company. Your dream." Olivia met his gaze directly. He made it very clear that Reed Innovations existed because he allowed it to, that his connections, his investment, his influence in the business world were the foundation everything was built on, and that he would withdraw all of it, watch you fail, if I didn't remove myself from your life. "And you believed him." "I knew him," Olivia corrected gently. "We both did. Harrison Reed never made empty threats. He would have systematically dismantled everything you'd built, made sure you were blackballed in the industry. Your vision, your work, all of it would have been collateral damage in his campaign to control your life." Maxwell was silent for a long moment, processing her words against his own memories of his father. "So you left, without explanation, without giving me the chance to fight him alongside you. Would you have?" Olivia asked quietly. "If I'd told you what he threatened, would you have been willing to risk everything you'd built?" To start over from nothing. For you? Yes. The answer came without hesitation, his certainty cutting deeper than anger would have. I couldn't take that chance, Olivia admitted. Couldn't be responsible for destroying your dream. And then, when I discovered I was pregnant, you made the decision for all of us, Maxwell said, an edge entering his voice. You decided I wouldn't want my children if it meant challenging my father. That I wouldn't choose my family over my company. I wrote to you, Olivia reminded him, dozens of letters during that first year, explaining everything, the pregnancy, your father's threats, why I'd left. When you never responded, I assumed you'd made your choice. That Harrison had shown you the evidence he'd gathered about my family, and you'd decided I wasn't worth the fight. I never received any letters, Maxwell repeated, the same words he'd spoken at their first confrontation. Not one. I believe you now, Olivia said softly. But at the time, your silence seemed confirmation of everything your father had implied, that your ambition would always come first, that family was secondary to the Reed legacy. Their first course arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. When the server had gone, Maxwell spoke again, his tone more measured. I spent years believing you'd used me to advance your career, then left when something better came along. That everything we'd shared had been calculated on your part. He studied her across the table. I built an entire narrative around your betrayal, never once considering my father's involvement. Because he presented himself as your ally, Olivia observed. The concerned parent protecting you from a gold digger. It was a masterful manipulation. He knew exactly how to position himself. While I played directly into his hands, Maxwell acknowledged, bitterness edging his words. Cutting you out of company records, removing your contributions from our patents, making it as though you'd never existed. Exactly what he wanted. We were both his victims in different ways, Olivia said. But the twins were the ones who paid the highest price, growing up without their father. Maxwell's expression softened at the mention of Alexander and Amelia. They're remarkable. You did an extraordinary job raising them. They made it easy, Olivia smiled slightly. They were determined, focused children, like their father. But with your heart, Maxwell added. Your sense of ethics. The balance I always lacked. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the weight of 2 decades of misunderstanding gradually shifting between them. Not disappearing, but perhaps becoming more evenly distributed. A shared burden rather than ammunition for recrimination. Tell me about their childhood, Maxwell said finally. The parts that aren't in videos or photographs. The everyday moments. Olivia did, sharing stories of the twins' early years. Alexander's determination to walk before he could properly stand, resulting in countless bumps and bruises. Amelia's habit of dismantling household appliances to understand their mechanics. Their competitive yet fiercely protective relationship with each other. They knew about you from the beginning, she continued. I kept your photograph by their beds. Told them stories about their brilliant father who would have loved them if he'd known they existed. As they got older, the questions became more complex, harder to answer without revealing the uglier truths about why we'd separated. When did you tell them about Harrison's ultimatum? When they were 16, Olivia replied. Old enough to understand the complexities, to know that sometimes there are no perfect choices, only painful ones with different consequences. And their reaction? Alexander was angry at Harrison primarily, but also at me for not finding some way to tell you about them. Amelia was more analytical, wanting to understand every detail of Harrison's threats, looking for the loopholes I might have missed. Olivia smiled faintly at the memory. They processed it differently, but both eventually came to the same conclusion, that I'd made the best decision I could with the information I had at the time. Maxwell nodded slowly, absorbing this. A generous assessment. They're generous people, Olivia said simply. Despite their intelligence and privilege, they've never developed the sense of entitlement that often accompanies both. They understand that power comes with responsibility, that success is meaningless if it's built on others' suffering. Values they clearly learned from you, Maxwell observed. Not from the Reed side of their heritage. I try to give them the best of both lineages, Olivia countered. Your vision, your determination, your ability to see possibilities others miss. But without the ruthless drive that characterized your father's approach to business and relationships. Their main courses arrived, along with a fresh bottle of wine. As they ate, the conversation shifted to the present, the twins' current projects, the upcoming Takashi partnership, the potential collaboration between their companies. Alexander has developed an integration protocol that could allow our systems to communicate without compromising either security architecture, Olivia explained. It's quite brilliant. Maintains the philosophical integrity of both approaches while creating a bridge between them. Like his mother, Maxwell noted, finding practical solutions to seemingly irreconcilable differences. The comment hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the professional context. Olivia met his gaze, recognizing the opening he'd provided. Is that what we're doing here, Maxwell? Looking for a bridge between irreconcilable differences. He considered the question, swirling the wine in his glass before answering. 20 years ago, I would have said our differences were fundamental, insurmountable. That what you did, leaving without explanation, keeping my children from me, could never be forgiven. And now, Olivia asked quietly, now I understand that we were both operating with incomplete information, that my father's manipulation created a situation where there were no good choices, only different kinds of loss. Maxwell set down his glass, his expression serious but not cold. I'm still angry, Olivia. 20 years of my children's lives can never be recovered. But I'm beginning to see that directing that anger at you is misplaced. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement of a more complex truth than either had initially recognized. A first step toward something that might eventually heal the fracture between them. Where do we go from here? Olivia asked, echoing Alexander's question from their dinner a week earlier. Forward, Maxwell replied simply. The past can't be changed, only understood. What matters now is what we build from this point, professionally and personally. And what do you want to build? Maxwell was quiet for a moment, considering. Professionally, a collaboration that benefits both our companies, while maintaining their separate identities and philosophies. Personally, he hesitated, choosing his words with care. Personally, I want to know my children, to be part of their lives in whatever capacity they'll accept me. And with you. He met her gaze directly, the practiced mask of the billionaire CEO completely absent. With you, I don't know yet. There's too much history, too many years of believing a narrative that's now been upended. I need time to reconcile the Olivia I thought betrayed me with the woman who protected our children and built something remarkable despite every obstacle. That's fair, Olivia acknowledged, appreciating his honesty. We all need time to adjust to this new reality. As they finished their meal and prepared to leave, Maxwell reached into his jacket pocket, extracting a small velvet box that he placed on the table between them. I found this in a safe deposit box last week, he explained as Olivia stared at it, recognition dawning. I'd forgotten its existence until our conversation about the jeweler who called you. With slightly unsteady fingers, Olivia opened the box to reveal an engagement ring, platinum band supporting a stunning emerald-cut diamond flanked by smaller emeralds. Exactly the ring she'd glimpsed in the jeweler's design sketches 20 years earlier. You had it made, she whispered, not touching the ring but unable to look away from it. It was completed the week you left, Maxwell confirmed. I'd planned to propose that weekend. When you disappeared, I couldn't bear to see it, so I locked it away and tried to forget it existed. Why show me now? Because it represents something real that existed between us, he said quietly. Something my father tried to destroy but couldn't entirely erase. Whatever happens moving forward, I wanted you to know that what we shared wasn't a delusion or a manipulation on either side. It was genuine, at least until Harrison intervened. Olivia closed the box gently, pushing it back toward him. Keep it. Perhaps someday it will represent not just what was lost, but what was eventually found again, in a different form. Outside the restaurant, their cars waiting on opposite sides of the street, They faced each other in the soft glow of streetlights. No longer the young lovers who had once dined here, planning a future together, but not quite the strangers they'd been at the New Year's Eve party either. Something in between, connected by shared history, by children, by the gradual dismantling of the walls built on misunderstanding. "I'll have my team contact Alexander about the collaboration framework," Maxwell said, professional words belied by the lingering warmth in his eyes. "And I'll send you those videos," Olivia replied. "The twins' childhood. It's time you saw what you missed." They parted without touching, without the formal handshake of business associates or the embrace of reconciled lovers. But as Olivia's car pulled away, she felt something shift within her. A loosening of the tight knot of guilt and regret she'd carried for 20 years. Not absolution, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. Of moving forward rather than constantly looking back. The path ahead remained uncertain, complex with the intertwining of business and personal relationships, shadowed by 2 decades of separation. But for the first time since she'd walked into Maxwell's New Year's Eve party, Olivia allowed herself to believe that something positive might emerge from the ruins of what Harrison Reed had destroyed. Not the future they'd once planned, but perhaps something equally meaningful in its own way. A new beginning, built on truth rather than manipulation, on choice rather than coercion, on the recognition that some connections, despite everything, refuse to be permanently severed. If you believe that understanding someone's full story can transform how we see their actions, hit that like button. And if you've ever discovered that what you thought was betrayal was actually protection, share this video with someone who might need to reconsider a broken relationship in their own life. Over the following months, a cautious new normal established itself among the 4 of them. The business collaboration proceeded smoothly, with teams from both companies working to integrate their complementary technologies. Alexander served as the primary liaison, demonstrating leadership abilities that impressed even Reed Innovation's most skeptical executives. On the personal front, Maxwell began spending time with the twins individually, discussing theoretical physics with Amelia over lengthy dinners, attending industry events with Alexander, gradually building relationships that acknowledged their adult identities while creating space for the paternal connection they'd all been denied. Olivia maintained a careful distance from these developing bonds, participating in group gatherings but never inserting herself into Maxwell's one-on-one time with their children. She understood intuitively that he needed to establish these relationships on their own terms, without her mediating presence constantly reminding everyone of the years lost. For months after their initial reunion, the twins organized a weekend at Olivia's vacation home on the Washington coast, a modern structure of glass and cedar perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. It would be the first extended time all 4 would spend together, away from the pressures of work and the public eye. Maxwell arrived last, his private jet landing at the small regional airport where Alexander met him with a Jeep better suited to the coastal roads than the luxury vehicles Maxwell typically preferred. "Mom and Amelia are already at the house," Alexander explained as they loaded Maxwell's weekend bag. "Fair warning, they're in full debate mode about the ethical implications of quantum computing in predictive medicine. It's been going on since breakfast." Maxwell smiled slightly. "Some arguments never resolve, just evolve with new information." "Speaking from experience?" Alexander asked, a knowing glint in his eye. "Your mother and I had similar debates 20 years ago," Maxwell acknowledged, though the technology was more theoretical then. The drive to the house took them along winding coastal roads, the Pacific appearing and disappearing between stands of towering evergreens. Alexander pointed out local landmarks, the cove where he and Amelia had learned to sail, the small town where they'd spent summers, the lighthouse that had fascinated them as children. "We came here every summer," he explained. "Mom would work remotely for a month, and we'd have this strange mix of vacation and immersion in whatever she was developing at the time. Some of our best memories are from these trips." Maxwell absorbed this information with the same hunger he'd shown for all glimpses into the twins' childhood, cataloging each detail, building a mental archive of the experiences he'd missed. "She always did her best thinking near water," he observed. "Even in New York, she'd walk along the East River when tackling a complex problem." "Still does," Alexander confirmed as they rounded a final curve, revealing the house nestled among wind-sculpted pines. That's why she bought this place. Says the ocean clears her mind. The house was smaller than Maxwell had expected, not modest by any means, but lacking the ostentatious grandeur that typically characterized the vacation homes of tech billionaires. Its beauty lay in its integration with the landscape, walls of glass framing spectacular views, natural materials echoing the surrounding environment. Inside, they found Olivia and Amelia in the open-plan living area, surrounded by digital tablets and holographic projections. So engrossed in their discussion, they barely registered the new arrivals. The privacy implications alone make this application problematic, Amelia was saying, manipulating a complex molecular structure floating between them. Predictive genetic markers could become the new redlining if access isn't strictly regulated. But with proper ethical frameworks, the benefits to preventative medicine could transform healthcare delivery, Olivia countered, adjusting another section of the projection. It's not the technology that's inherently problematic, it's the governance. The eternal debate, Maxwell interjected, setting down his bag. Technology versus application. Tools versus intentions. Both women turned, their identical startled expressions making Alexander laugh. See? Told you they wouldn't even notice we'd arrived. The weekend unfolded with surprising ease, hiking along coastal trails, preparing meals together in the well-equipped kitchen, evenings spent around the fire pit on the sheltered deck. They carefully navigated around sensitive topics, focusing instead on shared interests and cautious exploration of their developing relationships. On the second evening, after Alexander and Amelia had retired to their rooms, Maxwell found Olivia alone on the deck, wrapped in a thick sweater against the coastal chill, staring out at the moonlight reflecting off the Pacific. "May I join you?" he asked, pausing at the door. She nodded, gesturing to the adjacent chair. "It's peaceful out here. Helps put things in perspective." Maxwell settled beside her, accepting the glass of whiskey she offered. For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs below. "Thank you," he said finally, "for this weekend, for the chance to see them in this environment. Relaxed, unguarded." "They wanted you here," Olivia replied simply. "It was their idea. Still, you could have made it difficult, created obstacles. You've done the opposite." Olivia turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful in the dim light. "What purpose would that serve? They deserve to know their father. You deserve to know your children. My feelings about our past don't change those facts." "And what are your feelings about our past?" Maxwell asked, the question he'd carefully avoided during their dinner in Brooklyn. "Beyond the factual account of what happened, what do you feel when you look back on those years?" Olivia considered the question, taking a sip of her own drink before answering. "Grief for what might have been. Anger at your father for the choice he forced. Regret for the pain my decision caused, despite believing it was necessary." She paused, then added softly, "And gratitude for the twins, for the life we built, even if it wasn't the one we'd planned. No bitterness toward me? For not somehow knowing what my father had done. For believing the worst about you for 20 years. What would be the point?" Olivia asked. "Harrison created a situation designed to drive us apart. He succeeded. We both made choices based on incomplete information, on assumptions that seemed reasonable at the time. Bitterness won't change the past." Maxwell studied her profile, noting how the years had refined rather than diminished her beauty, how the strength that had first attracted him remained evident in every line of her face. "You've become remarkably philosophical. Raising twins as a single mother while building a company from scratch requires perspective," she replied with a small smile. "Dwelling on what can't be changed is a luxury I couldn't afford." "And now," Maxwell pressed gently, "what do you want moving forward, Olivia? For yourself, not just for the twins or the company." The question caught her off guard. So focused had she been on managing the present situation, on facilitating relationships between Maxwell and their children, that she'd given little thought to her own desires beyond professional success. "I want," she began, then hesitated, searching for the truth beneath layers of practiced self-sufficiency. I want to stop carrying the weight of that decision alone. To know that even if it can't be undone, it's at least understood. And I want. She met his gaze directly. I want to discover who we are to each other now, without Harrison's manipulation or 20 years of misunderstanding between us. Maxwell nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Not a return to the past. That's not possible, Olivia acknowledged. We're different people now, but perhaps something new, built on who we've become rather than who we were. Something new, Maxwell repeated, considering the concept, without predetermined expectations or the shadows of old wounds. Exactly. Olivia turned back to the ocean, giving him space to process her suggestion. If that's something you might want as well. Maxwell was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the distant crash of waves and the soft whisper of wind through the pines. When he finally spoke, his voice held a certainty that had been absent in their previous conversations. I'd like to try, he said simply. Not rushing, not forcing connections that may have altered beyond recognition, but with openness to possibilities neither of us anticipated when you walked into that New Year's Eve party. Olivia smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. I think I can manage that. They remained on the deck until well past midnight, conversation flowing more easily than it had since their reunion. Not the intense connection of their youth, but something potentially more durable, tempered by experience, by separate journeys that had shaped them into people capable of understanding complexities their younger selves could not have grasped. The weekend concluded with tentative plans for future gatherings. A sailing trip Alexander had suggested, a technology conference where Amelia would be presenting, holidays that might be shared rather than divided. Small steps toward something that resembled family, though its final form remained undefined. As Maxwell prepared to leave, the twins already loading his bag into Alexander's Jeep, he paused in the entryway where Olivia stood. Thank you, he said quietly. Not just for this weekend, but for them. For raising children I'm proud to know, regardless of the years I missed. They're easy to be proud of, Olivia replied. They always have been. Maxwell hesitated, then reached into his pocket, extracting a small object he placed in her palm. A key, modern and electronic rather than traditional. To my home in New York, he explained as she looked at it questioningly. For when you're in the city with the twins, so you don't have to stay at hotels. No expectations, no pressure. Just an open door when you choose to use it. The gesture was significant. Maxwell Reed's private spaces had always been carefully guarded, access granted to very few. This wasn't just a practical offering but a symbolic one. Trust extended where once there had been only suspicion. Thank you, Olivia said, closing her fingers around the key. I'll use it wisely. 1 year after Olivia Winters walked into Maxwell Reed's New Year's Eve party, for people gathered in a private dining room at the Archer Grand Hotel. Not strangers, not quite family, but connected by bonds both biological and chosen, by shared history and cautiously constructed present. The collaboration between their companies had proven successful beyond initial projections, the integration of their complementary technologies creating security solutions neither could have developed independently. Alexander had been named Chief Strategy Officer for the joint venture, his natural diplomatic abilities bridging the cultural differences between the two organizations. Amelia had completed her PhD 6 months ahead of schedule, her dissertation on quantum entanglement applications in secure communications already generating interest from research institutions worldwide. She divided her time between academic pursuits and practical applications at Winters Quantum, bringing theoretical advances into commercial viability with remarkable speed. Maxwell and Olivia had developed a relationship that defied conventional categories. Not quite friends, certainly not enemies, definitely not the lovers they'd once been, but something unique and valuable. They consulted each other on business decisions, shared parenting insights despite the twins' adulthood, occasionally enjoyed dinners alone where conversation ranged from technological innovations to philosophical questions about legacy and purpose. To new beginnings, Maxwell proposed, raising his glass as midnight approached, and to truths that, however painful, set us free. To family, Alexander added, in all its complex, imperfect forms. To Bridges, Amelia continued, between separate worlds that were never meant to remain divided. And to time, Olivia concluded softly, which takes away but also gives back, if we're patient enough to wait for its gifts. As they clinked glasses, the hotel ballroom below them counting down the final seconds of the year, Maxwell caught Olivia's gaze across the table. No words passed between them, but understanding did, acknowledgement of how far they'd come from that moment of shocked recognition 12 months earlier, appreciation for the journey still unfolding. Outside, fireworks illuminated the Manhattan skyline, celebrating endings and beginnings, the eternal cycle of loss and discovery that shapes all human lives. Within their private space, for people bound by blood and choice, by past wounds and present healing, by secrets revealed and truths embraced, welcomed the new year not as separate individuals but as something more profound. A family forged not through conventional paths but through the harder, more meaningful work of reconciliation and acceptance. The billionaire CEO who had laughed when his poor ex walked into his New Year's Eve party was gone, replaced by a man who had learned that true wealth isn't measured in corporate acquisitions or market dominance, but in connections once severed now carefully, imperfectly restored. The woman he'd dismissed as insignificant had given him the most significant gift possible. Children who carried his legacy in ways more meaningful than any company could, and the chance to become more than the son his father had tried to shape him into. Their story wasn't perfect. The years lost could never be recovered. The pain inflicted never completely erased. But in its messy, complicated reality lay a truth more powerful than any fairy tale ending. That sometimes what breaks us also opens us to new possibilities, that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting but does demand moving forward, and that family, in whatever form it takes, remains our most profound legacy. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more narratives that remind us how our greatest wounds can sometimes lead to our most meaningful healing. Remember that it's never too late to rewrite the story you believe about your past, to reach across divides that once seemed unbridgeable, and to discover that sometimes, what we thought was an ending was merely an unexpected beginning.